Drop the knife! I can't stop. I have to keep going. I need more. I need more. I need more!
The man's screams were silenced with a single shot to the head that rang out through the halls in this decaying building. I have been a detective on the force for over 20 years. I've worked a lot of disturbing cases in that time, but one in particular had pretty much consumed the entirety of my career. It was an ongoing investigation that would sporadically produce new leads, only to have them turn into dead ends. It all started in a quiet town back in 2001. I was just a rookie detective and was still learning the ropes. Our department was wrapping up our annual Halloween party when my partner and trainer at the time dropped a file on my desk. "Look alive, rookie. We got a new case just now. I'll let you take the lead on this one. Let's get this done so I can go home and have a couple drinks." He said this with a stoic face. Detective Hartford was a gristly, middle-aged man. The stress of the job had grayed his hair and wrinkled his face beyond his years. He always looked angry and stern, but he was actually a kind and generous man beneath the surface. This was only the third case I'd ever worked on, so I was surprised he wanted me to lead the investigation. Neither one of us could have predicted that it would turn out to be the longest and most disturbing case our department had ever seen. I opened the file and read through the reports. It was a missing person case for a child named Garrett. At first I thought he had disappeared while trick-or-treating, and his parents thought he'd gotten lost in their subdivision. He was only 5 years old. We sent out a search party immediately and combed every inch of the neighborhood. We didn't find anything that night, and after 3 weeks of constant searches with no leads or any new discoveries, we stopped sending out search parties and assumed the worst. The family had to bury an empty casket. I can't imagine the pain they felt. The case went cold for a while after that. 4 years passed by when suddenly I got a report from some campers. They were digging a hole for a fire pit when they found human remains. They belonged to Garrett. His body was moved to a lab for analysis and an autopsy. They discovered that the back of his skull had been fractured by a blunt object, which was determined to be the cause of death. We informed the family of this and gave them the remains to be buried. They had some closure, but were devastated beyond anything I could imagine. I decided it was best that we didn't tell them the most disturbing discovery from the lab: indents on some of the bones that resembled bite marks from human teeth. We tried matching them to dental records, but they were too damaged and decayed to get an accurate reading. Over the next 18 years, I received 12 more missing child cases. We found 11 of the children's bodies, each buried just outside of the town they were taken from, and no two were from the same town. The 11th body put us on our killer's trail. He left a fingerprint on one of the bones, and we ran it through the system and found him. The killer was identified as Howard Royce, a 42-year-old man who lived alone with no surviving family. His only tie to the outside world was a misdemeanor for larceny when he was 20. He broke into a museum for the occult and stole a few ritualistic items. Everything he stole was thought to have been recovered and returned. We assembled a small team to make the arrest. Before we left the department, we learned that another child had disappeared that morning. We knew it was Royce. We quickly tracked him down from his last known address and discovered a dilapidated house out in the middle of nowhere. The windows were all broken and boarded up. The front porch was collapsing away from the main structure, and the wood was rotted. The front door hung on by one hinge and swung loosely in the doorway. I and 4 other officers approached the house cautiously and began shouting orders to Royce. There was no response, so we slowly made our way inside, clearing each room carefully. The electricity to this place was shut off long ago. We only had our flashlights to guide us. The interior was so decayed that the drywall would crumble just from a slight touch. There was a horrid stench in the house that made it almost unbearable to even breathe. The air was stale and stagnant, and the old dust stung our eyes and lungs. As we made our way through the narrow halls, we noticed the floor leading to the back of the house was soft and seemed to squelch beneath our feet. I shined my flashlight down and recoiled in horror at the sight. There were maggots on almost every square inch of the blood-stained floor. I looked back at where we came from and could see a trail of smashed bugs from our feet. I gagged and fought to keep my stomach under control. We continued on to the back of the house, trying as hard as we could to ignore the squishing beneath our feet. When we reached the final room, we found Royce sitting in the dark at his table. We all froze in place at the terrible scene. Our dim lights caught his soulless eyes that were sunken into his skull. His stomach was distended and shredded apart. His intestines were practically dangling from his abdomen. I was shocked that he was still alive somehow. He was in the middle of devouring his latest victim, sucking the meat off the bones. Blood and viscera cascaded down his grotesque figure and smacked down onto the floor with a wet slop. 2 officers lost their nerves and started vomiting at the sight. We ordered Royce to drop the body and surrender. His only reaction was to pull out a very large butcher's knife and charge at me, spouting some nonsense. I had no time to react and dropped him with a single shot. We searched Royce's house and discovered that there was one item that was never returned from his theft nearly 20 years ago. We wrapped it up and brought it to a lab for examination. It turned out to be a book made of several different humans' flesh. There were occult rituals written in it about child sacrifice and eternal life. The book is currently being held in the evidence room indefinitely. We determined that Royce was trying to become immortal by devouring the flesh of the innocent, as the ritual stated. It was discovered that he was a devout member of a local cult, but he was removed for unknown reasons. The cult was later disbanded, and their ritual items were donated to the museum that Royce stole from. The investigation was finally over after 2 long decades. It was a bittersweet ending for me. Royce was gone and wouldn't be able to hurt any more children, but the families of his 13 victims never received the justice that they deserved. Their pain will never fully heal. I was finishing up my report back at the office when I got an urgent call. There was a situation that needed my presence immediately. We got a report of multiple bodies discovered in a basement. I remembered the neighborhood as I drove up to the house. It was the same house as the family of Garrett, the first missing boy that I investigated. When I arrived, there was a man who looked to be in his late 30s. His name was Noah. I recognized him immediately. He was Garrett's older brother. I found out that this poor man lost his entire family after they found the body of his brother. His mother took her own life the day after, and his father just passed away last week from a heart attack. The reason for me being here had nothing to do with that, though. I was here because of the grim discoveries that Noah made while sorting his late father's estate. Multiple bodies of both children and adult women were found in the basement of his childhood home. Noah's father left a journal detailing his brutal acts. Noah also discovered a book that was almost identical to the one found at Royce's, except this one had different rituals written in it. It looked and smelled grotesque, and I learned the name of those books later on. They're called Necronomicons. To my knowledge, Noah had his father's Necronomicon destroyed. I had a chat with Noah and filled him in on what really happened to his brother, and that the killer was now dead. I gave him my phone number and told him to call me with any questions he had. He nodded and thanked me, and then left to his home. This morning, I woke up to a call from Noah. He sounded distressed and was almost whispering. It took me a minute to make out what he was saying. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. It wants more. It wants more. It wants more.